Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to stage Dr. Liz Joy.
So my 19-year-old son said, "Mom, when you go to the stage, they have to play Danger Zone." All right, well, good morning. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to Denver for the 64th annual meeting of the American College of Sports Medicine and the 8th World Congress on Exercise Medicine and the World Congress on the Basic Science of Exercise and the Brain. Congratulations to the 2017 Program Committee, chaired by Dr. Walt Thompson, for organizing really a superb mix of our presentations and workshops that reflect the diversity of our ACSM membership and highlight ACSM's unique role as an international leader in the scientific discovery and the translation of exercise science and sports medicine. I'm really pleased to announce we have several showcase events happening Wednesday through Friday during our lunch breaks, and these events can be found in your program books as well as on the mobile app. And please make room in your schedule today during the midday break to learn more about what's next with wearables, discussing the right physical activity measurement tool presented by a panel of industry experts from Adidas, Technogym, Mia Global, and Medtronics. And Friday midday, please join us for the 10th anniversary of the ACSM American Fitness Index. AFI is celebrating a decade of actively moving America to better health with the release of our 10th annual AFI data report. Opening remarks for the panel presentation will be provided by Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. And as I'm sure you all know, legendary Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps, he is the most decorated Olympian in history, will be with us tomorrow for a very special session, and be sure to join us in Convention Center Hall A from 11:45 to 12:45. This will no doubt be a very popular session. Seating will be limited, so please be sure and get here early. I'm also hoping that your schedule allows you to attend one or other of these many special additions to our conference. And throughout the week, be sure to join the ACSM annual meeting conversation on social media by using the hashtag ACSM2017. I would like to remind everyone that photography and videotaping of presentations is not allowed in any of the sessions throughout the conference, and we really appreciate your cooperation with this. Let me now introduce several individuals who are being recognized this year for their distinguished career and outstanding scientific and scholarly contributions to sports medicine and exercise science. ACSM has selected 6 outstanding individuals to receive the 2017 Citation Award. They include Dr. Jack Berryman, Dr. Loretta DiPietro, Dr. Mark Hargraves, Dr. Michael Pratt, Dr. Stephen Rice, and Dr. Robert Ross. And our highest award, the ACSM Honor Award, is being bestowed upon Dr. Peter Raven. And please join me in congratulating each of these esteemed award recipients. These award winners will be in attendance throughout the week and will be formally recognized Friday evening at our awards banquet. And as you see them in the hallways, please be sure to congratulate them on their outstanding achievements. Now, I have the honor of introducing our Wolffe Lecture. The Wolffe Lecture is the keynote address of the ACSM annual meeting in memory of one of our founders, First President Joseph B. Wolffe. Dr. Yves Vanlandewijck has been invited to deliver this year's lecture entitled Crossroads and Conflicts, Olympics, Paralympics, or Cyborg Olympics. Dr. Vanlandewijck is professor in rehabilitation sciences at the Faculty of Kinesiology and Rehabilitation Sciences of the University of Leuven. His research interests include exercise physiology, biomechanics, and ergonomics. His main research applications focus on the development of evidence-based classification systems in disability sports to ensure fairness in athletic competition categories. Since 2014, the research unit of Dr. Vanlandewijck's lab is recognized and funded by the International Paralympic Committee as the Research and Development Center for Classification in Athletes with Intellectual Impairment. From 1997 to 2001, Professor Vanlandewijck was Vice President of the International Federation of Adapted Physical Activity. He is the founding editor of the European Journal of Adapted Physical Activity and the editor of the IOC series books, The Paralympic Athlete and Training and Coaching the Paralympic Athlete. He was a member of the IOC Medical and Scientific Working Group and a member of the association's board of the International Council of Sports Science and Physical Education. He is a member of the Sports Science Committee of the IPC since 1995 and its chairman since 2004. During this lecture, Professor Vanlandewijck will contrast the Paralympic athlete to maximal human performance, Sidious Altius Fortius, and to the cyborg athlete after robotic assistance optimization. Please join me in welcoming our 2017 Wolffe Lecturer, Professor Yves Vanlandewijck.
Good morning. It works. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Walt Thompson told me you are going to have an impressive audience, and I have. It is impressive, I have to say. Thank you for coming, even when President Liz Joy told me that they didn't organize anything parallel to this, so you didn't have another choice. I want to thank Liz Joy for the nice words she gave me introducing me. I want to thank President-elect of ACSM, Dr. Walt Thompson, for being a partner in crime since many years and giving me the opportunity now to bridge the Paralympic movement to academia. You are academia, and I hope I can somewhat inspire you to become part of what we call the Paralympic family. As you can see, the title on the screen says Crossroads and Conflicts, Olympics, Paralympics, and Cyborg Olympics. I'm going to try to handle this. I have a clicker in my left hand, a pointer in my right hand. Okay, it works. I started a PhD, or I finished almost a PhD in 1991. And as you can see, I was looking at the interface already at that moment between technology and the human being, in this case, a person with impairment, and trying to figure out what the impact of impairment is on performance using specific technology, and how this impairment-performance relationship would be impacted by changing technology. You can also see that I was working in a very modern times more referring to Charlie Chaplin than to the equipment I was using at that moment. You can see, for example, my metabolic unit. I could fit twice in my metabolic unit. I had 27 cables going to this AD converter over here, so you cannot really call it wireless EMG system. And I was also using 25 hertz cameras to get an idea about the kinematics. Most of the time, manually, we had to do the linear transformation, the direct linear transformation afterwards to get from 2D to 3D coordinates. In 1995, as introduced, I became a member of the IPC Sports Science Committee. And in 1996 already, I met Dr. Walt Thompson. He became a member of the Sports Science Committee also in 2002. And at that very moment, he was responsible for transferring, in fact, our questions from the Paralympic movement to academia, to the scientific world, and hopefully to bring some answers back. And that is what I mainly will try to do today, to bridge between the Paralympic questions and hopefully the scientific answers. Of course, he was not doing the work all by himself. Raymond So is responsible for athletes' health and performance in the committee. We have myself responsible, also as introduced, for evidence-based classification. David Legg from Canada for socioeconomic determinants of Paralympic participation and success. And to keep the gender balance. Osnat from Israel, who is responsible for athletes' education and coaches' education, transferring the scientific knowledge to the athletes and the coaches. And we have, of course, Daniela Lucina from Argentina, who is keeping us on track because mainly we are focusing on athletes, and she is the athlete representative, wheelchair rugby player in the committee. When you type Belgian wheelchair athlete in Google, then this comes up. I can guarantee you he is not really the average profile of a Belgian wheelchair athlete. He's David Anthony from GB. But I thought it was a very, very nice photograph because he's such a devoted and excellent wheelchair rugby player, even though he looks a little bit different than what you would expect from a wheelchair rugby player. I am going to talk mainly about the Paralympic movement, but make side steps also to, for example, the Olympics. And this is what you get when you type Belgian Olympic athlete. This is Nafi Thiam. Please remember the name, Nafi Thiam. Last weekend, she became the third woman in the universe, well, let's say at least what we know from the universe, to reach the 7,000 points mark in heptathlon. Only 3 women did this, including her. And she is also 22 years old and the Rio 2016 gold medalist in heptathlon. She makes us very proud. And when you type Belgian cyborg athlete, you get this man or woman. And I will make once in a while also reference to that, mainly at the end of my talk. To introduce you to the Paralympic Games, I prepared this little video. And we use these Paralympic videos also during Paralympic school days for elementary school children. There are programs that we developed in Europe and that are used all over the world, where we try to create awareness towards people with a disability in youngsters. When you want to change the world, you have to start educating your children. Which means that we go to the school, we transform the whole school into a Paralympic setting, and the children are going through the sports, they practice the sports, they have testimonies of former athletes or current athletes in the Paralympic movement, and also they look at images. And for example, what we ask when we show such kind of a video is try to recognize as many sport disciplines as possible. That's the first question. The second question, try to find differences with what you know from the Olympic Games. So that's also for you. You're not 10 years old, but that's the question for you. Try to recognize in this short 1-minute clip as many sports as possible. There will be some music. You asked Liz, some people asked her, start dancing. Exercise is medicine, dancing is exercise, dancing is medicine. So please, if you want.
Todo mundo, vamos lá, nossa mensagem, soltar nossa voz, força e coragem, vamos transformar cada segundo no melhor de nós pra todo mundo. Cada sonho uma esperança, entre a dor e a alegria, sempre nova a cada dia. Cada sonho tem seu preço, cada fim tem recomeço, cada tem seu valor. Vai na boa, vai que dá, vai na boa, vai que dá, vai com força e com vontade, inspirando emoções. Vai na boa, vai que dá, vai na boa, vai que dá, pelo sonho da igualdade em todos os corações.
Jefinho. The gap.
Brilliantly! Oh, what a goal! What a goal by Jefinho! And in off the inside of the post. He could not have finished it better.
Did you see this guy? The last images you got, a football player, the The guy is blindfolded, so he can't see a thing and only gets feedback from, oh no, I'm there, gets feedback from the auditory impulse from the ball. He's running with the ball, dribbling the ball, scoring in an incredible skill level. Phenomenal. What I'm going to do, the presentation is back. What I'm going to do is going to look at eligibility criteria. If you want to participate in the Olympic Games, there are performance criteria. There are other criteria, like age. For example, in judo, you can only participate if you are 15. Gymnastics, 16. Boxing, 17. So there are several criteria to meet. For the Paralympics, there is an additional criterion, which is you need to have an impairment. The impairments that are eligible to the Paralympic Games are the following. And you will see that the list is certainly not complete. And you could already start wondering why. I'm not going to give you all these answers, unfortunately. Physical impairment, visual impairment, and intellectual impairment. That is what you see on the boxes on the left. I'm not going to point all the time to the two screens. I will point to this screen, so I hope you can follow me and try to guide you verbally through that one. In the physical impairment category, we make a distinction between physical impairment in function and physical impairment in structure according to the ICF classification system of the World Health Organization. And for example, physical impairment in strength would be this athlete. An athlete who is a wheelchair rugby player with a C5 lesion level, and he is now tested on a treadmill to see what his anaerobic performance is. Another athlete would be an athlete with a combination of dyskinesia, and hypertonia. And as you can see, he will play a game named boccia. He needs to throw the ball. The ball he's going to use, the red ball, as close as possible to the white target. Please observe his skill.
He's the BC1 athlete from Japan. So he's allowed an assistant just to stabilize him there as he throws. Kitani favoring the overarm throw. Dumps it in, and that's very nice. Very nice.
Very nice throw, even though you can clearly see the huge coordination issue the person is dealing with. An example of a person with a structural impairment would be the person with amputation. Here an example from the high jump. Using prosthesis, but not taking off on the prosthesis. So one of these impairments is needed. Second, this is not only an impairment that has to be clearly defined to make yourself eligible, also the impairment should impact on performance. And please follow me in this. It's a very nice picture, although the athlete with high support needs that you just saw, with cerebral palsy, for example, he's not represented. Athlete with intellectual impairment is not represented, but it's a very nice photograph they used quite a lot in announcing the London 2012 Paralympic Games. And as you can see, this lady over here, because of the swimming suit she's wearing, you know she's a swimmer. So I'm asking you the very simple question. Do you think that the impairment, the physical impairment that she has, which is she's missing the left arm from the elbow down, is going to impact on swimming performance? I think yes. Now assume she would not have a swimming suit. Assume, no, that is very awkward what I just said. Assume she would wear another outfit. That's what I wanted to say. Assume she's wearing another outfit. And the outfit would be for running a 10,000 meter. Same question. With that kind of impairment, would the impairment impact on running a 10,000 meter performance? When you made up your mind, those who think, yes, it has, how far do I have to go down to change your yes in a no. And those who said no, how far do I have to go up with the amputation to change your no into a yes? That complex it is. And I will show you that this is only the start of the complexity. I am going to talk only, in fact, about two examples. That's the athlete with spinal cord injury, and that's the athlete with amputation, mainly running with the prosthesis. That are the examples. And some people will say, certainly from the Paralympic movement, they would say, what? Again, spinal cord injury and amputation? Why not focus on all the other athletes? What's wrong focusing on the athlete with cerebral palsy, the athlete with high support needs? Well, then show me the science behind it. There is a lot of work done on cerebral palsy and therapy until the age of 18. There's a lot done about cerebral palsy and function. But there is not too much done about cerebral palsy and performance. So it is very difficult to take an example and then at the end have to tell you all the time that the knowledge is still not there. That's the first invitation, to focus on cerebral palsy and performance instead of perhaps only looking at people who got ill and for whatever other reason they are coming to you. Another reason why I said, well, let's look at people with spinal cord injury and amputation is because the data from the IPC Medical Committee collected in London during the 2012 Games clearly show that there are more injuries related to the Paralympic Games than to the Olympic Games. And when you look more into detail, you can also see that especially injuries at the shoulder joint, hand, wrist, and elbow are really dominant compared to the other ones. I don't show the other ones, but you have to believe me that this was topping the table. And when you look at the kind of trauma we are dealing with, 50% was acute trauma, and here then we had the chronic trauma, overuse injuries, or acute on chronic injuries. Now I can guarantee you about 15 years, I think, ago, Mike Ferrara from Atlanta, he published a paper and he said at that very moment, do you know that 75% of wheelchair athletes who use the wheelchair also in daily life, 75% of those athletes, after those 10 years, have chronic shoulder pain. Can you imagine? I always tell my students, you know that that is your fault. Not in the past, but when this continues in the future, it is your fault. Because you can perfectly prevent, well, probably not perfectly, perfect doesn't exist in this matter, but you can certainly prevent these issues. So that's the reason. Illness is also very interesting. There, we double the numbers of the Olympic Games. So why is a person with spinal cord injury, why is a person with amputation, seems to be more vulnerable to illness? And that you can see here, from all the illnesses in the London Games, 30% were in spinal cord injury, 26% were in those athletes with amputation. And these were the kind of illnesses that they were confronted with. Respiratory, skin and subcutaneous tissue, digestive, the nervous system, and genitourinary. And when you are going to look at the skin and subcutaneous, then you can see that from those issues, spinal cord injured topped 50%, and the amputees 31%. Mainly the pressure sores, of course, were of a major concern. And when it comes to completely to the right, genitourinary, we saw that, I didn't want to press this, we saw that 77.4% of the urinary tract infections were in the athlete with spinal cord injury, mainly probably due to catheterization in non-optimal conditions. So these are the athletes I'm going to look at. and I apologize to all the other athletes that I am not going to include them in this presentation. First, a person with spinal cord injury. I'm not going to lead you through spinal cord injury, but I am going to address the neuromusculoskeletal consequences, look into the autonomic nervous system, say something about the impact of medication, and also look at something special for people with spinal cord injury, which is autonomic dysreflexia. These are two athletes, and I will make them push on the treadmill. This one you already know. On the right, it's another athlete. You can see the difference in propulsion technique. Well, when we look at some data about these two athletes, you can see that on the left side, the person has a C5 complete lesion level. On the right side, the person has a C6, C7 complete lesion level. Main difference is activity, the control that they have over the triceps brachialis muscle. On the left side, you see only 0 to 2 on the manual muscle test, which means, in fact, not functional to generate force. And on the right side, you can see a close to optimal triceps. The impact on performance is enormous. It means that on the left side, you can reach a speed, when you speed up the belt, within 60 seconds, you can reach a speed up to 8.5 kilometers an hour on the left, and almost the double on the right. You can have an idea what the impact will be on performance. It is enormous, enormous. And this is what we take into consideration, the musculoskeletal impact on performance. We don't take this into consideration. This is a very old slide from 1992 from Maria Hopman from Nijmegen in the Netherlands. And it's quite famous. You see it appearing all the time. And I'm going to start on the top one, where you see that persons with paraplegia, they are going to be able to reach the same cardiac output for certain levels of performance as able-bodied controls. But they do it in a completely different way. You can see that the stroke volume of those with paraplegia is much lower, mainly due to venous pooling in the splanchnic area dominantly. But they can compensate on the right side with heart frequency on submaximal levels. What does it mean? It means that on submaximal levels, it seems they can keep up. But when you have a person on the left, which is Joachim Girard, bronze medalist from Belgium in wheelchair tennis, and he's going to be compared to the man on the right, who is a tetraplegic wheelchair tennis player. You can see that his right hand, the racket is taped to his hand because he has an issue with grasping the racket. Well, if those two are going to be compared with respect to cardiac output, what will you see? The guy on the left will equal almost the performance of an able-bodied person. The guy on the right will have a strongly reduced stroke volume. And on top of that, he will not be able to compensate by heart rate, because in tetraplegia, mostly, and I say mostly, you also have sympathetic denervation. In fact, we have to look into the completeness of the autonomic nervous system. If there is indeed a complete section of the autonomic nervous system in those athletes, then you will see that they have only heart rates going up to 125 to 130 beats per minute, even when they are 20 years old. Can you imagine such a low stroke volume and then such a low heart rate, which will lead to an enormously, significantly reduced cardiac output and a huge impact on performance? So those two athletes are hardly comparable when it comes to the hemodynamics. When we are looking at thermoregulation, we are dealing with an issue. On the curve, the bottom curve, you see how athletes, able-bodied athletes, would react when they start at 0 on the x-axis, where the exercise starts. They are doing arm cranking, and they go for a whole full hour. you will see that core temperature will raise, and then afterwards they will start recovering in this fashion. Paraplegic athletes, the body is going to heat up, and then at a certain moment they're also going to go through recovery. But the tetraplegic athlete is reaching really very high body temperature and can even go into a state of hyperthermia and then get into trouble. This is the recovery rate, as you can see, after 30 minutes, where he is compared to the original values. Athletes with spinal cord injury do usually not sweat below the lesion level, and hyperthermia is really a concern. There's a little anecdote when we are talking about athletes who use medication. I was a wheelchair basketball coach myself, and afterwards I started wheelchair rugby in Belgium. And at a certain moment, one of the wheelchair rugby players came to me, and he said, "Coach, I have a problem. I have on a very regular basis, I have intercourse with my wife." I said, "Yes. What's the problem?" "Well," he said, "I mean sex." I said, "Yes, I understood, but what do you mean?" "Well, I thought that was something good." "Well," he says, "you know, I'm taking Viagra because I have erectile dysfunction, and now I heard from colleagues that the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, is going to put sildenafil on the list of forbidden products." I said, "Oops, now I understand the problem." To make a long story short, I digged into the literature, talked to the IPC Sports Science Committee, and we started a randomized controlled trial ourselves on spinal cord injury and the impact on exercise performance and exercise capacity of sildenafil citrate. This is the review only on able-bodied. At the end, what we can see is that there are only 2 maximal exercise capacity tests that were positive, indeed leading to improvement. That was Gofrani in 2004 and Richalet in 2005. What is also very specific is that they did this high altitude. This was even base camp of Mount Everest, and this was 4,350 meters. And here you could clearly see, indeed, there was a positive impact of taking sildenafil citrate on exercise capacity. I make a difference between exercise capacity and exercise performance. My definition for exercise capacity is the peak that you reach, like in a ramp test, and you reach your peak, let's say, within 8 and 12 minutes. Not very sport-specific. Sport-specific tests have also been done, most of the time measuring exercise performance, and this is here what they do by means of a time trial. Well, I can tell you, only here we found a positive effect on really high altitude, and in the time trial we also found a positive effect in the study of Su in 2006, but only in some of the athletes. It seemed that there were responders and non-responders. So we did a randomized controlled trial ourselves. The good thing, we got 27 athletes participating. I have to thank Claudio Perret and the Schweizer Paraplegiker Center, that was German, for being involved in this, in a multi-center trial. It was a randomized, controlled, placebo-controlled, double-blinded trial. People went through familiarization for the time trial, which you have to do. Placebo, and I'm on the x-axis down, placebo, sea level, sildenafil citrate sea level, placebo moderate altitude, sildenafil citrate moderate altitude. We have chosen moderate altitude 2,200 meters. Why? Because in a quick review of all the Paralympic events, not the games, the events, IPC-sanctioned events, World Championships, and so on, 2,200 meters was the highest altitude a competition had taken place in the past 5 years. So that was for us a good reason to look at 2,200 meters and to make it concrete. Again, to make a long story short, we did not find any differences at the level of exercise capacity. and we did find a negative impact on exercise performance, which means that in the time trial, they performed at the same level, but they did it with higher heart rates and with higher lactate production, which was good news for athletes who were using sildenafil citrate. It brings me to the last issue, which is autonomic dysreflexia, and this is really something very special. This is the lesion level. This is the lesion level here on the left screen, which is thoracic 6 or above. If there is a pain stimulus, and you just follow here, best perhaps to look into this screen here, if you have a stimulus here, pain stimulus below the lesion level, so the athlete doesn't feel it, it's going to result in a quite massive vasoconstriction, which is a sympathetic massive response. This hypertension that is a result of the vasoconstriction is going to lead to detection by the baroreceptors. End result is that because of the baroreceptors sending this information up to the central computer and going down again, inducing bradycardia, inducing vasodilation, we are coming into a very strange situation that we have vasoconstriction massively in the bottom part of the body below the lesion level and vasodilation in the upper part. Do you remember what I said about the stroke volume? The stroke volume is reduced because of the venous pooling, and now we have a system where we can squeeze the bottom part of the body, pump the whole blood to the upper part where we need it. So athletes, they find this, they know this. Is it effective? Does it work? Well, already in 1994, Burnham did a study showing that this boosting condition is going to lead to an increase of 10% of performance. And here it was a 10%, 9.7 reduction in performance in time in a race of 7.5K. The bottom part says that also on the peak levels, we had a significant impact. A study of Schmidt et al. In 2001. Peak values, power, oxygen uptake, and also heart rate significantly increasing. Nothing wrong until here. But what about this? 32 cases. This is a review from Wan and Krasyukov. Krasyukov, a fantastic researcher from British Columbia University, doing a lot of research in spinal cord during the Paralympic Games. They wrote this review indicating that 32 cases between 1965 and 2012 are described life-threatening complications associated with episodes of autonomic dysreflexia. From those 32, 7 people died. 5, that are the red crosses, because of hemorrhage. 1 because of seizures resulting in a status epilepticus, and 1 because of pulmonary edema. None of these were sports related. They were clinical cases. That's the good news. Again, the bad news, are athletes aware about this? In 2008, we were starting a survey, and the outcome was frightening. From all the athletes, 20% indicated, that's the left figure, 20% indicated that they use boosting during training, national or international competition. And when we asked them about, do you consider it dangerous? Then 50% were in the zone of not dangerous to somewhat dangerous. Somewhat, I do it, it's not that dangerous. I heard something, but. In a review, in a study that is published by Sherry Blowett, who is the IPC Medical Committee chairperson. IPC Medical Committee is doing screenings, and they did these screenings in here 3 major Paralympic events. the Beijing 2008 Paralympic Games, the London 2012 Paralympic Games, and in between in Guadalajara, they did 2011 an intervention in the Pan American Games. And from all the tests they run, 78 in total, 0% tested positive. There was one borderline case, but at the end, after retesting, there was no issue with this athlete. So 78, 0%. A marathon takes about, in a wheelchair, in able-bodied we know, it's not below 2 hours. They just failed. It was, of course, a very specific thing. But in a wheelchair, these days, the world record for the marathon is 1 hour, 20 minutes. So they go real fast. So you have about 1 hour and a half for the average athlete to do whatever you want and to create a pain stimulus and to go into an autonomic reflexic state. For example, you have a catheter in the bladder. You're going to clamp the catheter. You're going to start drink water. The bladder is going to extend. You get a pain stimulus. And as long as you are not going to have blurred vision, you don't get excessive headache and all the symptoms of an autonomic dysreflectic reaction, you can continue doing this until your skull blows off and you die. So not a good idea, and that, of course, is very difficult to see if the athletes indeed are using this as a boosting situation. I think I showed you a little bit about the complexity of the athlete we are dealing with. This is enormously complex. And then you can understand that when you're only going to relate impairment to performance, and then based on that relationship, going to classify athletes to organize a fair competition, that you're going to run into a situation like this. Sports federations are responsible for their classification system. In wheelchair rugby, that's what is on the screen now, they are classifying the cervical lesion levels, which is from C5 to C8 in principle, because above C5, you cannot manually propel the chair. So from C5 down to C8, you are going to see 7 classes. 7 classes where they think the impact of impairment on performance is significantly different and would cause otherwise an unfair advantage or disadvantage. When we see in basketball, you see that they are having 8 classes for all the rest of the wheelchair users, which is from T1 down for the spinal cord, and at the bottom, of course, also the amputees will come in, and eventually athletes with cerebral palsy. They used 8 classes. Now, this is still probably acceptable, but when we now look at tennis, ITF and the people responsible for wheelchair tennis decided that there is only 1 class for the tetraplegic wheelchair tennis athlete, and there is only 1 class, which they call the open class, from T1 down. So I can guarantee you, my assistant in Leuven, and now he's a doctoral assistant, Yuri, well, Yuri, he has a T4, T5 lesion level, he's a tennis player, he can train whatever he wants. He will never be able to go into the top 100 in wheelchair tennis. No way, because he has no trunk stability. He has to lean against the backrest continuously while playing wheelchair tennis. And next to him, or at the opposite side of the tennis net, will be an athlete who can lean forward, can use the trunk in the backhand, can use the trunk in the swing, can use the trunk in propelling the chair, and be way more dynamic than Yuri does. To confuse you a little bit more, in wheelchair racing, they are going to have 2 classes here up. When we are looking at the cervical lesion, we have 2 classes here down for all the rest of the athletes. Very confusing. Spinal cord injury research questions. I just give you a few about the aspects that I was talking about. And you can see with respect to the neuromusculoskeletal impact on performance, we definitely need better grip on the impact on positioning and strapping and all the tricks that athletes are using to optimize their performance. And I call it tricks, it's too negative. Of course, every athlete is going to optimize his equipment and is going to optimize the interface with his or her equipment. So it should not be called tricks. Yves, don't say this anymore. RCTs on training interventions. How can we improve performance of a tetraplegic? If I'm going to train and you give me a sponge and I'm going to squeeze that thing here 1,000 times, do you think it's going to have any impact on my cardiovascular system? Of course not. What if you can only use your shoulder muscles and your biceps, a C5 athlete? How to train these guys, not only with respect to their performance, but also with respect to when they get older. Healthy lifestyle, active lifestyle. You should better understand the impact of the autonomic nervous system on performance. With respect to thermoregulation, we should look at more possibilities of cooling strategies and how to avoid hypothermia. Because when athletes are going to work in those extreme conditions, you can really get into trouble. What about nutrition? Other medication that they eventually use, and nutritional supplements, and certainly also look into the causality of injuries and prevention. The athlete with spinal cord injury is an athlete with a very special exercise physiological reaction to effort, and quite vulnerable to quite a lot of issues while performing. Just to give you an example, I was dealing quite a lot with the wheelchair rugby team in Belgium. You have a player, and you go with your team to play in a very extreme condition, quite hot, quite humid, no airco in the sports hall. That happens, unfortunately. The result is the player is going to heat up during the first quarter. Body temperature goes up. What is he going to do? The coach says, drink cold water, very, very cold water, zip. Every time out, every single moment you have, you zip this cold water. Indeed, it helps to keep the body temperature down, but at the same time, you fill up the bladder. What are you going to do during the game? You're going to the toilet, you have to put a catheter in, you are vulnerable for urinary tract infection. You don't do it, the bladder is going to extend, you do an autonomic dysreflectic reaction. It's a complex situation. Okay, are you still with me? I'm going to the athlete who is running with prosthesis. This is a slide, and you can see it at the bottom of the screen. It says Vanlandewijck Yves, that would be me, 2014, ACSM Amsterdam. It was a keynote that I delivered over there, and this was the conclusive slide. It said, can we make decisions when an athlete wants to perform in the Olympic Games about the impact of impairment on that specific performance? In this case, a 400-meter performance. Do we have an answer ready which makes sense? When we know, and that was the conclusive slide, when we know that we kind of understand the capacity of the athlete, the prostheses were quite well studied, but the interface never seemed to be an issue. And with respect to the 400-meter, nobody at the moment in time that the question should be answered looked into the start, looked into the acceleration during the curve, or looked into maximal speed or what is left of it after a 200-meter sprint in the last curve, the maximal speed running. What is the impact in a double transtibial amputee running with prosthesis? That was the conclusive slide in 2014. That is the knowledge that we have, and that is not too much. How can you give advice in this if you only have these answers ready? Fortunately, This is not true anymore. I hope that some people in 2014 were listening to me and then started these studies. That would be nice. But it could be that they just came to that conclusion themselves. And so what I will do is, I will show you from the top right, the start, what's the impact of starting with prosthesis in a sprint, going to the left, what's the impact of running in a curve with prosthesis, going to the data that have been already provided in 2008 and 2009 and 10, what is the impact of the prosthesis in a straight running line. Who is this? Marlou van Rijn. Thank you very much, the man with the beard and the glasses. Who is Marlou van Rijn? Well, from now on, you will know who she is. Please, watch the video. She's going to start in the 100-meter sprint. She's the lady in the orange T-shirt over here, representing the Netherlands in Rio 2016. So here, lane number 6, Marlou van Rijn. There she goes. Wrong button. I got you really excited, and then I pushed the wrong button. Now it should be okay, huh? There she goes.
Away they go first time, and it's a brilliant start by Kamlish for Great Britain. She's way back at the moment, Marlou van Rijn. Kamlish is leading this. Kane is going well also. Benson's out's coming up, and Marlou, photo finish.
Wow. Now, if you would play the 2008 final of the men, you would see Oscar Pistorius running against Jerome Singleton from the US. Jerome is a single transtibial amputee. Pistorius, you know, Oscar Pistorius has a double below the knee transtibial amputation, and he runs with 2 blades. You would see in that 100 meter exactly the same. After 50 meters, about a gap of 10 meters that you have to cover up with, that you have to catch up at the end in the second half of the race. And she did so wonderful. I'm going to show it just one more time.
Away they go first time, and it's a brilliant start by Kamlish for Great Britain. She's way back at the moment, Marlou van Rijn. Kamlish is leading this. Kane is going well also. Benson's out's coming up, and Marlou, photo finish.
Photo finish, he said, and indeed it was a photo finish. So she took the gold. She took the gold medal in those last meters. Let's look what we know today about the start, the curve running, and the straight line running. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I looked at my clock and I see that I could be getting into trouble. So, first of all, there are 2 studies done. Please look at the study of Taboga. He tested 9 unilateral transtibial athletes and compared it with 7 able-bodied controls. That's the study that I will look at more in detail. And what he did was, he asked all the athletes to start in their original position, wherever the blade was. If the blade was in the back, good. If the blade was in the front, also good. And then they asked them to do the starts all over again, but in perfect symmetry, which means that they asked to put, when the blade was in the back, now to put the blade in the front and vice versa. What you can see is, from the top graph, the control group had a horizontal acceleration of 7.63 meters per second squared. And this was with an angle of force production that was 55.9 degrees. So quite vertical, not that horizontal. But when you look at the performance with the blade in the back, then you can see that the horizontal acceleration, which is of course very much related to your starting performance, is almost 1 meter per second squared down, and which is still a little bit better than when the blade is in the front. The reason why at the end the horizontal acceleration with the blade in the front, which looks like this would be more a disadvantage, is still compatible with the blade in the back is that the angle of force production was better horizontally directed. That was the main reason. Now, then Taboga did something interesting. He didn't test bilateral amputees, and he drew conclusions about bilateral amputees. And this is what he did. He said, well, I have all these data of the unilateral amputee, but I have them with the blade in the back and the front. So what when I combine this to a virtual athlete with bilateral amputation, and what if I combine it to a virtual non-amputee? And then you can see that indeed there was a clear disadvantage for the virtual bilateral amputee in the start with only 5.84 meters per second square compared to the unilateral amputee and compared to the virtual non-amputee. The forces were directing almost all of them in approximately 55 to 58 degrees and were non-significant. So there we could eventually already conclude that there is a clear disadvantage for the athlete with amputation. Curve running. What if your blade is in the outside part of the curve? Or what in the photograph on the top left, what in lane 2 or 3, there you can see a person who has a left amputation, so the blade is at the inside of the curve. Well, Taboga, again, he asked athletes to run in a straight line, 40 meters, accelerate, and measured from 20 to 40 meters the kinematic data. And then he did the same for curve running, running from 0 to 20 to 40 meters, measuring in the last 20 meters. And he did it clockwise and counterclockwise. This means that every athlete had to run with his prosthesis at the outside in the curve and with the prosthesis at the inside in the curve. And the end result is that, of course, in the curve, this is the able-bodied, the blue line. The red line is the person with the blades. You can see that the middle dot, there is a significant difference between the straight line running of the amputee, who is less fast, can develop less speed, which is on the y-axis, than the control group. What you also can see is if the blade is in the inside, that you have a bigger drop than when the blade is at the outside. And I also indicated it in the photograph. The blade at the outside would lead to a maximal speed of 7.21 meters per second, which would be higher, of course, than the 6.94 meters with the blade at the inside. The explanation that the authors gave to this was mainly based on the contact time, which was increased when the blade was at the inside. We know that curves have a major impact on performance. I just returned to the previous slide. These tests were done for curves with a radius of 17.2 meters. This is what we normally see in an indoor environment. In an outdoor environment, the curves have a radius which is completely different. With the end result is that we cannot transfer these data easily from inside to outside environments. For the straight line running, we have excellent data from the two most famous studies, I think, in this area, which is from Bruggeman first in 2008, and later on from Peter Weyand. I'm not sure if it's 2010, I always have 2009 in my head, that he did afterwards. What you can see on the graph is the black line, which is the vertical ground reaction force of the athlete who is able-bodied. And the red one is the one who is going to run with a double transtibial amputation with blades. What you can see below the x-axis, there will the results appear. You will see that there is a contact time of the amputee runner, which is longer. You will see that the aerial time, which is the time that there is not one limb in contact with the ground, which is significantly shorter. And at the end result, also the swing is significantly shorter. When you now look at the middle curve, you will see that there is also approximately 20% less ground reaction force that is delivered, and also the impulse, which is the time to develop the force from zero to the peak, is different, which means that the impulse is bigger, is more important in the athlete who is running with biological legs. When we look at the right, there appears a little curve, and that is indicating that the horizontal forces, that there is less braking force when the person with the blades is putting the blade in contact with the ground. More braking force in the athlete who is running with biological legs. Extremely important and food for a lot of discussion is what the prosthesis is doing. When you see the person putting the blade on the ground in the first part of the stance phase, elastic energy is stored into the prosthesis, which is returned in the second part. Now look at the percentage of return, which I indicated in the middle. There is an indication that there is 50% more energy return from the blade. When we are going to calculate, biomechanists know you do this by inverse dynamics, you can calculate the external joint moments. And the external joint moment at the knee joint and at the hip joint are significantly lower for the blade runner, the red curve, compared to the able-bodied. So when you transfer this into work done, and you look at what the ankle contributes and the knee, for example, you would see that at the ankle joint, a lot of work is produced by the prosthesis. The ankle joint itself doesn't do that much work. And when you look certainly at the knee joint, you see that there is much less work delivered at the knee joint of the person running with the blades. When we look into the swing phase, I'm going to speed up a little bit. What we see is because of differences in the distance between the axis of rotation and the center of mass of the limb below the knee level, you can see that there is a clear difference when it comes to the inertial force that you have to generate to go through that swing, which is a huge advantage, it seems, for the person wearing the prosthesis. This slide is the metabolic cost, and I'm going to move that on. So my question is quite simple, and I'm going to make a big statement now. This is a statement, it's my statement. It's not from the IPC. I do not understand if we have that little information available. And when you see differences going up to 40%, 50%, 20% difference. Now I'm not talking about advantage and disadvantage. I'm only seeing pluses and minuses all the time. And at the end, you're going to decide that a person with a prosthesis can compete against a person with biological legs in a race that is decided sometimes on 1/100th of a second. Are you kidding me? It's a very bizarre thing to do that. I'm saying this very strongly. I don't think that an athlete running on a blade should participate in the Olympic Games against a person who is running with biological legs. Did I say I do not want athletes running on blades participating in the Olympic Games? No. It's perfectly possible that you organize a 100 meter and Usain Bolt will win, then a 100 meter and Elaine Thompson will win, and then you organize a 100 meter and Johnny Peacock with a unilateral amputation will win. That would be perfectly possible. And we do not compare. Don't forget, the sample size sometimes is 0. We calculate the impact of double transtibial amputees running with blades from data from n equals 0 sometimes. So therefore, I hope that I can convince, and I partly already convinced them, the Paralympic movement to organize a network, several networks of Paralympic Centers of Excellence, I call it, where we can do multi-center studies, where we can bring athletes from different countries together in one study and then come with good conclusions on these very, very crucial questions. The last part, and I'm going to go quite fast, the cyborgification in sport. A cyborg, which is just a photograph. When you type cyborg in Google, there it is. You have several, that's the one I have chosen. A cyborg is defined by Haraway in 1991 in his book. A cyborg is a hybrid body resulting from fusion of a live organism and man-made technology. Fusion. What is fusion? According to Peter David Ho, he says, a Paralympic wheelchair racer and prosthetic-wearing athlete is the most explicit example of cyborgification in sport today. 2 weeks ago, I took David for a beer. We had a long discussion, and we didn't agree. I don't think that an athlete using a wheelchair is a cyborg, because I'm going to transform now into a cyborg. I'm going to transform back into a human being. That is what these guys do. They use a mechanical device. A mechanical device which is unpowered. The power comes from the athlete. The mechanical device here comes from, there is no mechanical device, only the shoes, and the power comes from the athlete. Why is nobody concerned about this graph? Athletes with a disability outperform able-bodied athletes. From 800 meters on, they are faster, 10% faster, compared to the runners. And this point here is always moving more and more to the left. Will never be completely to the left, I guarantee you, because that is a too difficult issue. Why is nobody concerned? Very simple, because wheelchair propulsion is different from running, so nobody is concerned. So why is everybody concerned about those running with double blades? To progressively outperform people who run with biological legs. A 400 meter, only 5% behind in the world record. And it's coming closer and closer. Why would we be concerned? Biomechanically, these are two different things. You cannot make them compatible. They are different. So we should not be concerned that at a certain moment athletes are going to outperform another athlete. What we see with the unilateral amputees is that the longer the distance, the more problematic it becomes. There, I don't think that in the future we'll have these issues of competitive comparison. Why and where does it come from? It's of course these athletes. Pistorius was the first. Today we have Marcus Rehm. Look at his personal best. 8.40 meters in long jump. With this distance, when he would jump his personal best, he would have taken in London 2012 the Olympic title. And in Rio 2016, also, he would have won the gold medal in long jump with this jump. Are you concerned? Well, the man is taking off on the prosthetic leg. He has probably a disadvantage in the run-up and probably an advantage in the takeoff. Or is it the athlete? Who is that to tell? Where are the studies to show all the data that we need? I went to the first Cyborg Olympics, and that in fact is not true. I went to the first Cybathlon, but when you type Cybathlon in Google, I really make a big commercial for Google here. When you type that into Google, then you will come up with Cyborg Olympics, this terminology. The organizers of the first Cybathlon did not use the word Cyborg Olympics. They used Cybathlon. What did they do is they used powered wheelchair races as a competition, powered exoskeleton races. brain-computer interface races, where people who are tetraplegic, above the C5 lesion level, and only by brain waves, they are going to steer the animation on the screen. We have functional electrostimulation bike races. And then there were two more, which is the powered leg prosthesis race and the powered arm prosthesis race. All these are powered. They are not unpowered. It's written, the first international competition for people with disabilities supported by modern assistive technology. They should have written modern powered assistive technology. They organized it in a sports hall in a competitive way where the functional electrostimulation was going around the track, 1 against 1. And then, for example, the exoskeleton race would start over here, an athlete for each lane, and you have to go to the other side as fast as possible. What is your task? Activities of daily living. Going upstairs, opening a door, sit down in a couch and get up again. That was the competitive level of this organization. What is my concern? Why do I bring it up? It's organized in 2016. It's announced on their website that they will organize the next Cybathlon in 2020. Oh, there is an Olympic cycle, 16-20. So the next step will be Cyborg Olympics, where we are going to have kind of Formula One competition between engineers. Excellent. Because we need the best assistive technology to improve the quality of life for people with a disability. So that's excellent. But don't focus too much on bringing the best sophisticated technology to those people who can afford it. Ladies and gentlemen, 80% of people with a disability are living in the developing world. 80% in developing countries, which means everything I said in the past 50 to 60 minutes is completely irrelevant to them. We always have to have assistive technology which is going to improve quality of life of humankind. And this means that sometimes you need the Formula One approach, but sometimes you also need to make it as complex as needed, but as simple as possible, which gets then, at the end, into an application to the world of people with a disability living in developing countries. My time is gone. It was a fantastic experience. I have to thank a few people. All these people I discussed with, I got the data from in the past 6 months, preparing this presentation. These are colleagues from sports philosophy, sociology, anthropology, but also, of course, from the biomedical sciences. I know this talk was strongly biomedical oriented. I have to thank these 5 ladies. Charlie has 3 angels, Yves has 5. These are Yves' angels in Leuven, working hard. I want to thank the personal contact I had over the past 40 years with athletes, which I put there now anonymous by showing an RX of an osseo-integrated prosthesis, where we really have fusion of the athlete with the technology. Of course, I want to thank ACSM for this fantastic opportunity and this fantastic audience. I just want to thank to be here and to have listened to me. Thank you very much.